Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
You know how you get to know the delivery people when you order things a lot? Well, that's how it started for me. I work from home, and with my busy schedule, I often find myself ordering everything online, from groceries to clothes to work-related stuff. It's just so convenient, but it also means that I see the delivery folks pretty often. There was this one guy, Mike, who was on the same delivery route as my apartment. At first, he seemed just like any other delivery person, friendly, professional, doing his job. I would see him a few times a week, handing me packages with a smile. We would exchange pleasantries, like you do when you see someone often, something like, "Oh, it's a nice weather today." Or, "Thank you, have a good one." Just simple stuff. But after a while, I noticed that he started chatting a bit more. He would be asking about my day, what I did for work, and I didn't think much of it though. I figured he was just being nice and chatty. We all have those days where we want to talk a little more than usual, right? But then, the conversation started feeling off. One day, he left me a small potted plant with a note. It said something like, "I hope this brightens your home." I was surprised, but I just brushed it off. Maybe he was thinking that he was being friendly. But then it happened again, and this time, it was a book, something that I mentioned in passing that I wanted to read. Again, there was a note, something simple like, "I thought that you would enjoy this." I started feeling uneasy. These small gifts felt personal. It wasn't like I'd given him permission to leave me things outside of his job. It felt invasive, like he was stepping into my space without asking. But I told myself not to overreact. A couple of days go by, and then it escalated. I came home one day to find a bag of groceries at my door. Not just any other random grocery, but the exact items that I usually ordered. My stomach twisted. How did he know what I bought? Had he been looking at my delivery details? It was too much. It was too personal. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. It wasn't normal for a delivery person to know this much about me. I started feeling anxious every time that I saw the delivery van pull up. I didn't want to open the door anymore. I decided that I had to do something about it, so I reached out to the delivery company. I explained that a driver was leaving me personal gifts and how uncomfortable it made me feel. They did sound concerned, which was a relief to me. They assured me that they would look into it and then address the situation. For a while, things were quiet. I didn't see Mike, and my deliveries came from different drivers. I started to relax, thinking that maybe the company had reassigned him somewhere else. I hoped that it would end there and that he would understand how his actions crossed a line. But then one evening, I came home to find a handwritten letter at my door. My heart sank as I recognized Mike's handwriting. He wrote about how he missed our chats, that he hoped that I was doing well. It was so unsettling to think that this guy knows where I lived and that he felt entitled to continue reaching out despite my clear discomfort. I contacted the company again the next day. I stressed how serious the situation felt and how it was affecting my sense of safety in my own home. They apologized profusely and promised to take stricter action. They said that they would ensure that he wouldn't have access to my route or my details again. Luckily, after that, I stopped seeing any signs of Mike. The delivery company must have rerouted him or dealt with the situation somehow. I was relieved but it also left me with a lingering unease. It's strange how something so seemingly innocent, like receiving gifts and attention, can twist into something darker. The whole experience made me rethink how I interact with people who come in and out of my life. It's sad to say, but it made me more cautious, more guarded. I pay closer attention to what I share and with whom. It's just the balance between being friendly and keeping those boundaries clear. In the end, the deliveries went back to normal, and I found peace in the familiar rhythm of my life. While things have settled down, I often think about how easily someone's good intentions, or what they perceive as good, can blur into something so intrusive. It's a lesson that I didn't expect to learn from ordering groceries, but here we are. Life is just funny like that, I guess, full of surprises, either for better or for worse. I, a 19-year-old female, study in a university. During the semester, I noticed that someone had been checking off my own attendance on our class sheet. I didn't know anyone at all, so I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A week later, a guy sitting in front of me started talking to me, and he seemed really friendly. Eventually, he asked for my contact info, claiming that he needed help for classwork, and I gave it to him. After that, he started spamming me with messages, stickers, and videos in class. Whenever he noticed that I left them on read, he would turn around to check if I was on my phone to respond. He'd also track when I was last online and would shoot looks to get my attention. Strangely, he would browse my profile pictures and stare blankly at them, not typing anything, just frozen. I did tell him that I needed to focus, but it didn't stop him from spamming anyway. He purposely angles his screen so that I can see everything that he's doing, and it's creepy seeing how obsessively he monitors our chat. He also started to ask for hugs. A couple of days ago was my last class for this year with him. I saw that the pen ink used to check off his name was the same color used for mine on the attendance sheet. So I put two and two together, and I'm pretty sure that it's him all along. I just talked to him and he denies it, but if he is telling the truth, then this situation is even weirder. His behavior has only been limited to class hours, so I just want to know if I'm being unnecessarily creeped out. I was physically followed at my previous job, and it made me really wary since then. I just want to know if maybe he's just socially awkward, and after a while, he'll stop? He's going to be in the same class as me next year too. Update. I just confronted him, and he is more avoidant of me now, so I would like to thank everyone for their advice. This happened quite a few years ago. I had an affinity for a particular white substance in the form of lines back then. And one very cold snowy night at around 11 p.m., I went for a walk to meet my dealer. I had never been to his place before, so he gave me the address to his small 2-story apartment building with maybe 6 units in it. Upon arrival, I noticed several strangers inside. After they had hit their pipes, 2 clearly unwashed guys came over to sit at the dining table while I waited for my G. I've never smoked anything besides weed and cigarettes. I was instantly uncomfortable by this. They tried making small talk, but I grew increasingly uneasy, giving only short, vague answers. I quickly paid for my stuff. I grabbed the baggie and I got up from the table. That's when one of the guys offered to walk me home. My heart started to sink and I politely declined. "Oh, I'm okay, thanks. I don't live far." The other guy stood up and said, "No, really, We can walk you. We don't mind. We have to get going anyway." That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I became very aware and very scared, and I immediately thought that I'm fully dressed and ready to go, but they still have to put on their coats and shoes. If I leave now, I'll get a head start and quickly disappear. They said something else as I headed for the door, but I pretended to take a phone call. I waved goodbye to my dealer, and I closed the door behind me. I then jogged down the hallway to the outside door, and once I got outside, I ran for the street. I decided not to take the fast route home because, from the building, they'd be able to see me. I didn't want them knowing even the slightest direction that I lived in if they were really following me. The building was at the end of the street, so instead of going straight up the hill the way that I initially came from, I turned right and I started jogging. I kept glancing back and finally, I saw them, about a block behind, following me. The street I needed, Stanley Street, was across the intersection on my left, about another block ahead at a four-way light. As I approached the intersection, I noticed the corner house on my right. There was an older man sitting on his porch, smoking, and I recognized him. He was also another dealer that I had met only once a few weeks before when my usual guy was dry. I choked up as I got to his porch and asked if he remembered me. He did, and he asked, "What's wrong?" I quietly told him, "I think these two guys are following me," and asked if I could go inside for a minute until they passed. He didn't hesitate. We went inside past his front living room and then into the kitchen, where I explained what happened. He told me not to worry, that I was safe there and I could stay as long as I needed to. Then we heard a knock at the door and I started to panic. He went to the door, looked through the peephole and yelled, "Just a minute." He came back quickly and then whispered that he knew the guys and that he was going to invite them in to have a hit. He told me to sneak out through his back door, which was beyond the kitchen, and then go to the right of the yard and find the gate. This would lead to a side street. He instructed me to creep up along the side of the house, close to the shrubs, and check the porch to make sure that they went inside. I followed his plan, and when the coast was clear, I didn't jog. I sprinted up Stanley Street and I zigzagged all the way home. When I think back now, I am in disbelief at my actions and how foolish I was. I thought I was invincible. I was far too trusting, but I truly thank God for the man who helped me that night. I don't know what those two guys wanted from me, but I'm forever grateful that I never had to find out. I'm a 29-year-old man from the Philippines, and even though this incident occurred back in 2013, over a decade ago, I still find myself haunted by it every time that I return to my hometown. At that time, I was just an 18-year-old college student. It was the night of our department's socialization party, which had wrapped up around midnight. As the only one among my friends with a car, I had always taken the role of the designated driver. And after dropping my friends off at their homes, I was parking in my usual spot, just a few houses away from my own, due to the limited parking in our area. As I was about to exit the car, I noticed a girl standing near the entrance of the alleyway leading to my house and several others. She was wearing a shirt with our department's logo, so I assumed that she had just walked back from the party. But in front of her was a man in his late 20s. He was clad in a hoodie, stood ominously, seemingly blocking her path. The girls then locked eyes with me, and I immediately recognized her expression. It was a silent plea for help. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my bag and I stepped out of the car. The man, noticing my presence, began to walk into the alleyway, and when I reached the girl, he had vanished from sight. It felt as though whatever threatening situation had occurred moments before was over, and I was tempted to walk away. But then, I caught sight of the strange man again. He was leaning against the wall of a nearby house, and his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and just then, the girl called out from behind me. Her voice trembled with fear, and I saw her approach, visibly shaken. "Can you walk with me to my apartment at the end of the alleyway?" she asked, explaining that the man had been silently blocking her way. I glanced back at the man. He appeared intoxicated, perhaps drunk or on drugs. We began to walk, our breathing shallow as we passed him. And after putting some distance between us, I glanced back, but to my horror, he was following us. We had already passed my house at that point, but I couldn't leave this girl to face him alone. As fear coursed through me, she suddenly broke into a full sprint, and I had no choice but to keep pace with her. We reached the gate to her apartment, and she hastily swung it open, slamming it shut behind us. We then dashed into the building where a second gate stood, this one smaller, likely designed to keep pets from escaping. She opened it, and then we slipped through, just as the sound of the man approaching the first gate reached our ears. We bolted up the stairs, making our way to the third floor. Breathless, the girl knocked urgently but softly at her apartment door, and after what felt like an eternity, it swung open, revealing her friends, a guy and a girl, around her age. They looked bewildered but quickly locked the door behind us and then led us into the bedroom. They turned off the lights, and we just sat there silently, with our hearts pounding. The girl broke down in tears, recounting the terrifying events to her friends. She revealed that the man had been following her for 10 to 15 minutes, and she expressed her relief at having seen me. Unsure of what to do next, I just called my aunt, who was staying at our house that night. And thankfully she answered swiftly. I urged her to call the police, and at this time, we could now hear the man pacing around the apartment, seemingly looking for us. He was mumbling something that we couldn't hear well from the other side of the door. A few minutes later, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was my uncle, a policeman, reassuring me that help was on the way. What felt like hours dragged on, and eventually the police arrived. My uncle instructed me via phone to come downstairs and recount the ordeal to the officers. They informed us that they had seen the man wandering around the gate and eventually into the far end of the alleyway. And once the police had finished their inquiries, they allowed me to go home. I recounted the entire story to my aunt, who urged me to get some rest. Despite my exhaustion though, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of that strange man. What if he had caught up with us? Was he armed with a knife or some weapon? I fought to dispel the terrifying images racing through my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be watching me in the dark, a knife glinting menacingly in his hand. So, I am not necessarily sure whether this counts as a creepy or more so just unsettling, but here it is. This summer, I went to LA to spend time with my boyfriend, and me, being European, became obsessed with Target. Hence, we would often venture in there to browse a bit and whatnot. This particular store was in a rather nice area of LA, so I never had to really worry about some creeps, but here we are. Anyway, we decided to go to Target on a nice afternoon, and I could spot some people standing in front of the entrance while walking from the car. Generally speaking, I usually don't think much of this, since people wait to be picked up and whatnot. But there was this one guy who just looked kinda off, like I got immediate bad vibes from him, and he kept staring at everyone walking by. What ticked me off is how he stared at me and my boyfriend walking by for just a tad bit longer. I saw him in my peripheral, just taking off right after us and walking into Target. And hear me out, I am naturally a very observant person. I've had my fair share of creeps, and I stand on business when it comes to observing my surroundings. Anyway, I tried glancing over my shoulder in a very subtle way to check if he's still there, and as you can guess, not even 10 feet behind, there he was. My boyfriend was completely oblivious to the whole thing, so I started to suggest going into different aisles to see if this guy will still follow. I didn't tell him because I didn't want to make him stress if I didn't have a super valid suspicion. And would you look at that? Every time that I look around, there he was just staring at me. So I kept trying to test my theory until he just suddenly vanished. I just thought, I'm just being paranoid again. So I thought that we would grab a drink from Starbucks on the way out since everything is okay. We go to Starbucks, and I'm still glancing around to see if I can spot the guy anywhere around. But nope, nothing. So we happily take off towards the exit, and there he was, just waiting. I saw the moment he spotted us and just smirked and then just proceeded to follow us to the car. And at this point, I'm like, screw this, and I said to my boyfriend very quietly, "Hey, someone has been following us since we walked in. I lost him in the store, but he was waiting by the exit. He's right behind us. Don't make it obvious. Just get into the car and lock it as fast as you can." So, my boyfriend looked behind, and would you look at that? The guy was following us to the car very closely behind. The moment that we were by the car, my boyfriend just unlocks the door and we get in as fast as we can and just lock that shit because what if he tries to get in? But the man just stood behind the car, staring through our back window right at us, and then proceeded to just walk away like nothing happened. The weirdest thing? When we pulled out of the parking spot, not even 10 seconds later, the guy just vanished into thin air, nowhere to be seen. I have never been so paranoid in my entire life if he got into another car and maybe tried to follow us home. But after that, we just got back home and everything just seemed so oddly normal, besides my minor heart palpitations. I still don't understand what might have been the purpose of the whole thing, but boy, it scared me just fine. My encounter when I was 14. So when I was 14, I liked to go for walks alone. Just me, some music, and wherever I decided to go. One day, it might have been early spring, I'm walking through a beautiful wooded area with the sun glimpsing through the branches and leaves. I then saw a man I'd say around mid-30s, walking and looking around in the opposite direction to me. He then turned to me and asked if I had seen his dog. Me, being oblivious to what he said no, and then I tried to walk away. But he seemed really desperate and upset, practically begging for my help. So eventually, I agreed and I helped him look for close to an hour. He then disappeared down a heavily wooded area and called out that he found his dog and needed help to free him from some branches. Me, being relieved to have found the dog, was originally skeptical to go in after him, but stupidly I did. It was only then where I found the man's true intentions. He had pulled his trousers and pants down and wanted me to do unspeakable things to him. I stood frozen as he only stepped closer towards me. In a panic, I ran while trying to take photos of him to show anyone for help. But as I ran, he chased close behind. We came to a bridge which was over a river. Don't ask me how I did it, but I managed to slip, dropping my phone into the river. I scrambled to my feet and I continued to run. Then I realized that he wasn't chasing me anymore, and he had seemingly disappeared. I never told anyone this story because I thought no one would believe me. But now, I'm 17, happily in a relationship, and it's been on my mind for the last 4 years, so now I just have to tell someone. Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. I'm 31 and female. When I first moved into that old brick apartment building, I was drawn to its charm. The neighborhood was quiet, with tree-lined streets and friendly faces. For someone starting anew, it felt perfect. My one-bedroom apartment was on the 3rd floor, offering a view of the little park across the street. It was cozy, and it was just right for my needs. Settling in took time. I painted the walls with soft shades of blue and gray. I hung pictures and filled the shelves with books and tiny little trinkets from my travels. The place slowly became my home, and I found peace in my routines and in the gentle hum of life around me. The building itself was not large, just 4 floors with a handful of apartments on each. People came and went, and we exchanged polite nods in the hallways. Among those people was Mr. Barret, who lived directly below me. He was an older man with a kind face and had a habit of striking up conversations about the weather or city events. At first, his friendliness was a comfort to me, a sign of the welcoming community that I was now a part of. But after a few weeks, I noticed small things out of place in my apartment. A book moved from the shelf to the coffee table, a mug left in the sink when I remembered washing it. I just shrugged it off, attributing it to my own forgetfulness. Life was hectic. I had a new job, a new environment, and it was easy to overlook things. The feeling of being watched began to creep in though. It's a sensation that prickled at the back of my neck when I was alone. I dismissed it as paranoia, especially that I live alone and I'm in a new place. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just nerves. But then, the noises came. Late at night, footsteps above me when I knew the apartment was vacant. Faint taps on the walls, as if someone was listening. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, straining to hear more. But the sounds would cease as suddenly as they started. My mind raced with different explanations. Old pipes, settling foundations. I clung to logic even as doubt gnawed at me. Mr. Barrett's presence also became more noticeable. He seemed to appear whenever I left or arrived home, lingering just a moment too long in shared spaces in the building. His questions, once charming and friendly, felt intrusive, like he was prying into my routines and my plans. I began to take longer routes, avoiding paths where our encounters seemed inevitable. But despite my efforts, his interest persisted. He left small tokens at my doors when he stopped seeing me. It would either be freshly baked cookies, a book he thought that I would like, and initially, I accepted these gestures with forced politeness. Yet each gift felt like he was binding me to his attention. It was an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake. One rainy evening, after a particularly long day at work, I entered my apartment to find a strange scent in the air. Mr. Barrett's cologne. Let me tell you, ever since the moment that I met this guy, I have noticed the scent of his cologne, and he uses the exact same thing every single time. And that cologne lingered in my apartment unpleasantly that night. I panicked. I checked the door, the windows, all were as I had left them. The thought of him being inside, invading my space, sent a shiver down my spine. I considered reaching out to the building manager, but I hesitated. I was unsure of how to explain what felt like a series of coincidences. Without concrete evidence, my concerns seemed trivial, an overreaction from stress or fatigue. So, I just decided to request a change of my locks, hoping that would bring peace of mind. My life continued, my days blurring into one another. I tried to distract myself through my job and my friends, yet at night, the feeling of being observed returned, stronger and more pervasive. I'm not the type to lock doors inside my house, but I took to sleeping with my bedroom door locked. It was a small act that offered little comfort. Really, they could break it down if they wanted to. But knowing that it was locked was so much better than not doing anything. One morning, as I left for work, I noticed Mr. Barret watching from his window, his gaze following me down the street. It was unnerving, the constant awareness of being under scrutiny. I resolved to be more vigilant and also to document every single odd occurrence so that I may build my case if needed. Weeks passed and the situation escalated. On a warm Sunday afternoon, I returned from the market to find my apartment door ajar. My heart raced, fear twisting in my stomach. I stepped inside cautiously, noting the subtle disturbances. A chair moved to a different side, a drawer that was fully closed and now open. Ever since things like this started happening, I've been extremely vigilant and aware of things in my apartment, to the point that I would take a picture before I leave so that I can assure myself that I was not just losing my mind, but that something was really moved. But the most unsettling was that my journal, one that was tucked away in a drawer, now splayed open on the coffee table. The pages were turned, my handwriting and my intimate thoughts laid bare. I was angry, and I was scared at the same time. This invasion was personal, deliberate. I documented everything just as I had been doing, and I brought to the management all the evidence and observations that I have gathered, and they approved to check the cameras in the hallways. Well, the footage revealed what I dreaded. Mr. Barret entering my apartment. Armed with this evidence, I filed a formal complaint to the building management. The response was swift, decisive. Mr. Barret was confronted. His key was confiscated. My locks was to be changed immediately. But they did not want to kick him out though. I threatened to involve the police if they didn't, and they probably did not want any bad press or issues, so they decided to kick him out. What's weird is that when all of this happened, Mr. Barret remained silent. He didn't deny anything. He didn't try to explain his side, defend himself, tell us where he got the key to my apartment from. And all he did was just give me an unsettling stare. And to this day, I still live in the apartment. Everything is normal now, but sometimes, when I'm outside, I look over my shoulders. I have that little fear inside me that one day he might get back at me. Also, my doors are always locked now and I got my own camera. Mr. Barret, I hope that I never see you again. For context, this happened to me years ago when I was about 13, maybe 14. I grew up in a small to mid-sized city in the West, pretty safe in a quiet middle-class neighborhood. This was back when I still bought into organized religion and I was going to an overnight lock-in at the church gym. For the non-Christian kids who aren't familiar, it's basically a huge Jesus-focused sleepover for teens. The church was only maybe a 10 to 12 minute walk from my house, and the quickest way to get there was to cut across a park right next to the elementary school. This was the early 2000s, so I definitely grew up in the age of stranger danger and teaching girls to always be vigilant. On the other hand, I was walking a short distance through my own neighborhood to the church, and I was very responsible for my age. I was an oldest daughter, always the babysitter, and my parents had okayed me walking by myself. I would drop by with my sleeping bag and pillow after they picked up my little brother from practice. I was running a little late, so the sun was just setting as I approached the park. As I crunched my way across the grass next to the tennis court, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning my head, I saw a figure, clearly a man, dressed in dark clothing and leaning against the brick wall of the school. He was kind of tucked into an alcove formed where the building met the fence around the playground. He was out of sight from the road. The man was just standing outside of the halo of light from the lamp above a nearby door. The man was just lounging in the crux of the wall and the fence. What initially caught my eye was the flicker of the lit cigarette in his mouth. It was too dark to see his features, but I could tell, as I noticed him, that he was already watching me. He was a fair distance away across the grass, but it was just open space between us. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. I felt that uneasy tingle creep down my spine. I suddenly realized that I was alone in the growing dark, and there was some unknown man tracking me with his eyes, and I couldn't make out. Instead of continuing to cut diagonally across the park, I veered right toward the sidewalk and the street so that I wouldn't come too close to him. I walked a little faster, trying to shake off my uneasiness. I was telling myself, "You're just being silly." And the first time that I glanced back, he hadn't moved, though I could still feel him watching me. As I left the grass of the park and I approached the street corner, I felt briefly relieved. I was back under the street lamps, which by now had flicked on. Only 3 or 4 short blocks until I was at the church. I glanced back once more to reassure myself that I had worried for no reason, expecting to see nothing. By now, the man should be completely out of view, right? Instead, I felt the pit of dread in my stomach turn to acidic fear when I realized that the man was in fact halfway across the park now, walking in my direction. I immediately crossed to the other side of the street and I began walking faster. At this point, I could feel the adrenaline rushing through me. I didn't have any real words or images to describe what I thought would happen to me. It was just a jumble of snippets of news reports and vague fears about what happens to young girls who are out alone at night. I was still trying to convince myself that it could just be a coincidence. The man could just be walking in the same direction. After another block, as I approached the next corner, I looked back again. The man had reached the edge of the park, and instead of walking straight ahead, he too had crossed the street to my side. And even worse, it seemed like he had closed some of the distance between us. And to my eyes at least, it seemed like he was walking faster. I immediately felt my terror increase. At this point, I was convinced that he was a predator and I had made myself easy prey. I still had 2.5 blocks to the church, but at this point, I was wondering whether I would ever make it to the lock-in. I glanced back at the man once more, and he had closed the gap even further with his longer legs. I still couldn't clearly see his face, but I had seen enough. I turned around, and I started all out running up the street. My backpack thumped against my back, my heart raced, and my breath turned shallow. I ran all the way to the church parking lot before I looked back again. And by the time that I did, the man was gone. To this day, I have no idea if that man was after me, or if he just thought that I was some weird kid running down the street at dusk. Frankly, I'm glad never to have found out, one way or the other. I never post anything on Reddit, but I have to share this story because it really affected me as a child. When I was about 12 or 13, I used to play a lot of video games with my best friend, and we often played shooters together. As you can imagine, it's easy to get frustrated, and at one point, I ended up breaking my PlayStation controller. Since I didn't have a spare, I couldn't continue playing. So I told my friend that I had to stop. He said that I could come over and borrow his second controller since he didn't live far away and it was just a short walk. I thought, okay, and I told him that I would be over soon. So I grabbed my keys and I started walking to his house. It was already dark, and since it was winter, it was snowing and very foggy. While walking, I had a strange feeling like I was being watched. I kept looking around, but I didn't see anyone. When I arrived at his place, I picked up the controller and I saw through a window that a man was standing in the middle of the street. I pointed it out to my friend and we both wondered who or what was standing there. It did look like a person, but we couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette. Eventually, we decided to go outside and see if the person needed help or if something was wrong. We stepped out and asked what was going on, but there was no response. The person just stared at us and then walked away. We were both confused and then we told his parents, but they just brushed it off thinking that we were imagining things because we played too many video games. And after a while, I figured that it was time to head home. Since we had played video games together for a while, I almost forgot about the strange encounter. But when I was walking back, I started to feel that same eerie sensation of being watched. I saw a few passerby, but they all seemed normal, nothing strange. But just before I got home, I looked behind me one last time and I saw that person again, this time standing behind a tree staring at me. Then they started walking toward me and eventually they began running. I could tell that it was an older man, probably around 60, but I was surprised at how fast he was running. He was shouting something in a language that I didn't understand, but he didn't seem happy. I ran for my life, clutching my keys, and tried to unlock my door as fast as possible. And when I got inside, I quickly glanced back, but the man was gone. I rushed to my room, and I immediately told my friend about what just happened. He suggested that I call the police, which I did. But since my description wasn't very detailed, the police took a report, but didn't seem to take it too seriously. My parents were visibly shocked, but nothing ever came out of it. In my village, 4 other people reported similar experiences, saying that someone was watching or following them. I was one of them, but no one was ever caught by the police. To this day, no one knows who this man is, whether he's just trying to scare people or if it's something more sinister. No one knows for sure, but everyone agrees that it seems to be a man around 60 years old. Beyond that, no one can give a detailed description. That day, I feared for my life. I've told many of my friends about this, and I have received mixed reactions. Some said it sounds like a spooky campfire story, while others believed me and were visibly scared. A few even told me that they had experienced the exact same thing. A few years back, my mom, 46 and female, my sister, 23 female, and I, 28 female, were driving to the shops when we noticed an old car tailgating us. As we pulled into the shopping center car park, we couldn't see the car behind us anymore, so we assumed that he had driven off. Just as we pulled into our parking spot, The same old car sped into the space directly in front of us, and we saw the driver. He was maybe in his 40s, and he looked really angry. He got out of his car, and he kept looking back at us as he walked into the shop. Just as we thought that he was gone, we saw him poke his head out around the door and then look at us again. This really freaked us out, so we decided to go park somewhere else. That's when he noticed him running out of the shopping center and then looking through all the cars for us. At this point, we were really getting freaked out, and keep in mind, this was a busy shopping center in the middle of the day, so it just seemed so strange. Eventually, he spotted our car and randomly stopped what he was doing to stare at his phone. My sister and I decided to run over to the security guard and then tell him what was happening. The guard went over to him, said something, and then the guy looked over at us again before getting into his car and then driving off. He must have been on something, but it was really freaky. Hi everyone. I would like to share my story. I apologize if some writing may be off. I'm not a native speaker, and I asked Google Translate plus my little English to help me write my own experience down. So here we go. Working at the little coffee shop on the corner had always been a pleasant part of my life. It was a cozy spot, a place where regulars came to escape the rush of the city, to linger over steaming cups and quiet conversations. I loved being part of their routines, their familiar faces, and the small interactions that made my shifts enjoyable. One regular stood out among the rest though, a man named Thomas. He was in his mid-30s with a mild demeanor and a penchant for black coffee. Every morning without fail, he'd take a seat by the window with a notebook, scribbling away as the world passed by outside. At first, I thought nothing of it. Many patrons found comfort in the routine, and Thomas seemed no different. He always greeted me with a polite nod, his eyes lingering just a second longer than necessary. I brushed it off as friendliness. After all, in a place like this, regulars became part of my shop's character. Thomas's visits became so predictable that I hardly noticed him sometimes. He was just another piece in the tapestry of my workdays. But then, subtle changes began to occur. Thomas started arriving earlier and staying a bit longer than usual. His questions about the coffee shop turned personal. He was inquiring about my preferences, my work schedule, my hobbies. I tried to answer politely, but I was also maintaining the distance expected between a barista and a customer. The exchanges, while innocuous at first, began to feel a little more intrusive. One rainy afternoon, while wiping tables, I found a note tucked beneath a mug at Thomas's usual spot. It was nothing more than a thank you for the coffee and the atmosphere, but it kind of unnerved me. He wrote my name with a heart on the side. He had left it on purpose, a message for me alone. I just crumpled the note, dismissing it as an odd gesture from an eccentric patron. But days turned into weeks, and he started leaving small gifts for me. A bookmark, a pen, a flower. I accepted them, but the gestures were becoming a pattern, one that I couldn't easily ignore. One evening after closing, I found a postcard slipped under the door. It bore a simple message that says, "Thank you. You make my day so much brighter." His name was scrolled at the bottom, and I felt a chill, a realization that his interest had crossed the line into something personal, something unwanted. I confided in my manager, a kind woman named Susan. She listened carefully, her expression concerned but also understanding. We decided to monitor the situation at first to see if it would escalate. She assured me that I wasn't alone, which was a small comfort, in an increasingly uncomfortable situation. Thomas's behavior continued though, his visits more frequent. He used to come to the shop 2 to 3 times a week, but now he's here almost every single day. He never crossed the boundary into overt hostility, but his presence was wearing me down. Each shift, I found myself on edge, scanning the shop for his familiar face, dreading the sound of the bell announcing his arrival. One day, as I finished my shift, I noticed him outside standing across the street watching. My heart raced, a mix of anger and fear. It felt like an invasion that separated my professional life from my personal space. I just tried to hurry home. I began to change my routine. I left the shop at different times, taking varied routes home and different shifts at work. I hoped the changes would dissuade him, signal my discomfort and an interest. But Thomas was persistent. The gifts kept coming. It was left on the counter sometimes when I wasn't looking. Small tokens that made my skin crawl. I wanted to file a report with the local authorities. I just wanted to document the situation in case it escalated. The officer that I spoke with was sympathetic. He was explaining the limits of what could be done without direct threats or evidence of the harassment from Thomas. I know, the system, though well-intentioned, it offered me little comfort. I took additional precautions. I changed my phone number. I adjusted privacy settings on my social media. I just made sure that my personal information wasn't easily accessible. The breaking point came one evening as I closed the shop. The street was dark and it was illuminated only by the glow of streetlights. While I was walking home, I heard footsteps behind me, soft but unmistakable. My pulse quickened, instinct pushing me to quicken my pace, and I reached my building, my heart pounding in my chest. Later, from the safety of my apartment, I tried peering through the blinds to see. Thomas was there, and he stood on the opposite sidewalk. The sight filled me with dread, the realization that avoidance and subtle hints had failed. I was facing something that I couldn't ignore. The next day, Susan and I arranged for a colleague to escort me home after my shifts, an interim solution until a more permanent one could be found. The support of the coffee shop staff was a small beacon in a challenging time that I was in. Their presence and support was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. The final encounter came on a sunny afternoon. Thomas went inside of the shop, directly to the counter. He was calm, yet with intent. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement of all that had passed between us. His expression was different though. It looked calm and something like he's given up. He just placed the final note on the counter, turned, and left. It read simply, "Goodbye," and that was it. Just as how it started suddenly one day, it also just stopped. I would never understand what was going through that man's head, but I appreciate the fact that he did not end up harming me and I was able to escape this ordeal unscathed. Though I will admit that I still get nervous at times when I hear the bell ring in the coffee shop, thinking that it may be Thomas returning.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.